Well, people who resist change, people who experience change as threatening to their interests will always characterize that source of change as being destabilizing, or being a problem, or being a threat. And it sort of goes with the territory. So then the question is, how can you prepare for that, rather than how can you avoid it? So just think of it as a term of honor, and think of it as a term of distinction and honor. Yes, we are making a difference, but then the challenge is to be smart about finding the strategic capacity to actually make the protest count. It's not like marketing an idea, it's building relationships. Social movements, just like people who do religious organizing, it's built person to person to person. Because what a social movement requires is not just that you make your idea marketable, but that you actually engage a person in a process of learning. And you sort of have to ask yourself, well, how come I see it differently? Why do I see it this way? If I see it this way, well then, not why should, but why? What is it in my experience that gives me this understanding that this is unjust? Now, how can I engage with other people in terms of their experience to bring about a similar kind of understanding? Sometimes organizers are called agitators because you're creating a kind of tension to challenge a person to step up and honor what they say they believe, but turn it into action, turn it into doing. I think that courage is built through solidarity. Courage is built through reminding people of what their deepest values are. Courage is also built through example, and it's also built through success. But it has a lot to do with how to tap into sources of hope, actually. Yeah, I think that first of all, violence and conflict are two different things. And no social movement has ever succeeded at anything without conflict. But there have been more successful movements that have engaged in nonviolent conflict than in violent conflict. But nonviolence is not, it's a bad word, because Gandhi, who coined it, never called it nonviolence. He called it satyagraha, which meant truth force. It was a form of power, not a form of not doing something. And what we learned in the civil rights movement, the farm worker movement, was that nonviolence imposed a responsibility on you to be constantly proactive. So it's a common strategy in social change to organize in such a way that you mobilize your supporters that are outside the reach of the opposition. Now, Mexican students in the United States are in a great place to have a huge and really important influence, not just in terms of moral support for people struggling in Mexico, but what are Mexico's interests in the United States? Does it have economic interests here? Does it have political interests here? Does it have a reputation it wants to defend here? You bet. And that makes it vulnerable. That makes the powers that be vulnerable. So I think it's important to think about the position of power that students in this country are with respect to the government of Mexico, so as to be able to open space for students in Mexico to proceed with their protests. Does that make sense?
Perfect.
It's a critical piece to the whole picture. Well, I think hope and optimism are two different things, and I think that only a fool is optimistic about everything, because the world is a challenging place. The philosopher from Córdoba, Maimonides, said that hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. What he's saying is, I want to be a realist, and I recognize that in the world it is always more likely that Goliath will win. But sometimes David does. And if you think in your own life experience, how many times has that happened which you didn't expect, but it did? It's that sense of possibility for me is where hope lives.